Mornings in Miami always carry a rhythm of their own. Lazy, humid, and heavy, like even the air is waiting for something to crack open. Inside the Summit Wealth Bank's private client lounge, everything was curated to evoke elegance and control. Ivory marble floors, pale cream leather chairs, soft recessed lighting, and not a single sound out of place. Until Lisa Newman's voice sliced through the air like a slap across the face. "You need to leave. This room is for actual clients." No one moved. No one spoke. But what had just echoed through the room, sharp as a judge's gavel, brought time itself to a halt. Vanessa Clark, the woman Lisa had just asked to leave, didn't speak, didn't react right away. She just stood there, eyes locked on Lisa, as if weighing whether to forgive or to sentence. Her face was calm, almost relieved, not because she didn't understand what was happening, but because she had expected it. No one in the room knew, or if they did, no one recognized, that the woman in the soft blue cashmere sweater and simple jeans was the CEO of Summit Enterprises, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that had just acquired the very banking system they were all working for. No designer bag, no power tie, no obvious signals of authority. Vanessa had walked in like any ordinary middle-aged woman, stopping by the bank after picking up vegetables at a local market. And that precisely was the point. That morning was a test, a trial, not for her, for them. No one questioned her when she requested access to the VIP lounge to handle a $5 million 0 cents transaction. The receptionist bowed slightly and pointed toward the glass room without hesitation. A trained reflex, or maybe just unconscious obedience to her unassuming presence, but as soon as she sat down, pulled out her tablet and began preparing her documents, the side door swung open and Lisa Newman strode in, like she'd smelled smoke from an unreported fire. Lisa, the woman who prided herself on her financial vigilance, stepped forward, heels clicking on marble like a ticking clock. Her blonde bob sharp, voice flat, gaze icy. "We'll need to verify the source of those funds." Vanessa looked at her. Not surprised, not angry, just a quiet look as if to say, "Ah, there you are." The memories came flooding back, like a film reel in slow motion. 23 years old, receiving her first commission check from a real estate deal. She took it to the bank, proud and nervous, only to be flagged, suspected of fraud, forced to wait 2 weeks for verification. At 26, she tried securing a loan to launch an affordable housing project. Came with collateral worth 1.5 times the loan. Still, the banker shook his head. Too risky. And now, 2 decades later, she sat inside her own bank, the branch she had purchased, restructured, rescued from crisis, still being treated like she didn't belong. Vanessa slid the tablet across. No words, no shrug, just a composed gesture from someone who no longer needed to explain herself. But then another voice rang out, a man's voice, nasal, magnetic, and laced with disdain. "You're holding up the line, sweetheart." Edward Pierce, straight out of a luxury watch commercial, glided past and almost deliberately flicked his wrist. The tablet slipped from the edge of the table, hitting the floor with a soft but piercing thud, as if the whole room had just witnessed a formalized insult. Still, Vanessa didn't flinch. She leaned down, picked up the tablet, gently wiped the screen. Every motion spoke of someone who had been through this 1,000 times, and each time she had learned to tuck her fury away, storing it in a private drawer deep within her heart. Some insults don't need to be shouted to be heard. They're delivered through glances, silence, and offhanded comments that cut like knives. Across the room, Natalie Wells, a younger employee, stood with her arms crossed, eyes calculating. She spoke up, not loudly but just enough to carry. "That mine doesn't look right. Could be stolen money." The words weren't aimed at Vanessa, but they struck her squarely. No name was needed. because sometimes insinuation wounds deeper than accusation. An older man raised his eyebrows. A young woman quietly pulled her purse closer. And just like that, the room advertised as a place where clients were welcomed with the utmost respect turned into a stage where prejudice and hidden power cast their nets. Vanessa didn't move. She didn't have to. She knew this dance all too well, because she wasn't there to prove who she was. She was there to let them reveal who they were. And sometimes only when you walk into a room where people think you don't belong do you truly see the light that exposes the gatekeepers. The silence still hung like all the oxygen had been sucked out. But it wasn't the comforting kind. It was the suffocating stillness of a storm just beginning to form. Natalie's final remark, subtle, sarcastic, drifted through the air like a whispered sin. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. One short sentence and the whole room shifted. Two clients looked up. One frowned. Another leaned over to whisper in a friend's ear. Vanessa remained seated, like a statue in a courtroom. She blinked slowly, then finally spoke, her voice calm, fearless. "My name is Vanessa Clark, look it up." But Lisa shook her head, as if that name carried no weight in her world. "Not verified. This isn't a public service center." The words hit like a verdict. "You don't matter here." In one corner of the room, Keith Morris, a sharp, young, up-and-coming tech entrepreneur, slowly lifted his phone and hit record. A tiny red light blinked on, and just like that, the room had a new witness. Invisible justice. Vanessa turned to him, her voice soft but firm. "Don't film. We don't win with clips. We win with the truth." The words made Keith pause. He hesitated, but from across the room, a tall black man in a gray suit stepped forward. Calvin Holt, 40 years old, steady and refined, placed a hand on Keith's shoulder. "Brother, put it down. This isn't something we make go viral. This is something we speak about, not record." Keith wavered. His eyes met Vanessa's. She simply said, "Use your voice, not your lens." And no one understood the weight of those words more than she did. Because she had lived a life where people were always quick to take her picture as some rare success story, but never wanted to hear the real story behind it. The air in the room froze, and then, from the left side, Maya Reed, a young woman with curls, clutching her purse like it held the last of her dignity, whispered, "This is messed up." Vanessa turned to her. "Say it, they need to hear it." Maya stood up. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word hit like a slap to those who sat in silence, pretending not to see. "She's not the problem. You are." Lisa tilted her head, a mocking smile curling her lips. Natalie didn't bother to hide her scowl. "Security is on standby," Natalie said under her breath, laced with threat. Edward, still lounging against the marble column like he was watching cheap theater, laughed. "You really think she's got $500,000 in that account? Pawnshops down the street." Then he bent down, folded a piece of paper, and with his foot slid it across the cold marble floor until it stopped at Vanessa's feet. Maya picked it up. Her eyes scanned it, and her voice cracked as she read aloud, "Go to the pawn shop." A silent gasp rippled through the room. An older woman clutched her handbag. A young father glanced at his child, then at Vanessa. The room was no longer still. It buzzed like a forest before it catches fire. Vanessa took a deep breath. Then, for the first time since she walked in, she spoke clearly. "That's enough. Every word you speak is destroying this bank." Lisa smirked, like she was enjoying a casual lunch with a side of entertainment. "You're not a client, you're a fake. Go play rich somewhere else." Vanessa quietly pulled out her phone, dialed a number. Her voice was low, steady, like a storm issuing orders. "Carla, initiate Protocol 6. Her assistant's voice came through loud and clear. "Standing by, ma'am." Vanessa didn't raise her tone, but her next words sucked every ounce of oxygen from the room. "You will regret this. Not because I yelled, not because I filmed you, But because you just told the wrong woman she didn't belong in a place she owns. Lisa scoffed. Delusions don't scare me. Keith raised his phone again, but Calvin stepped forward, standing between him and Vanessa. We do this right. No videos, no edits. We speak, Edward shook his head. All security. Lisa nodded. Natalie grabbed the landline, feeling invigorated. Vanessa didn't move. Didn't blink. Her stillness, cold, anchored, was the same force that had steadied her when her first real estate deal nearly collapsed over forged documents. That stillness had carried her through 4 economic crashes and 14 acquisitions. But this time, what was being questioned wasn't just a name or number, it was her very existence. As a woman of color who didn't fit into their mold of what wealth is supposed to look like, Lisa shouted like she could drown out the truth with volume. She's a fraud. Robert, get her out of here. And in that moment, a door opened. Not the front door, but the door of awareness, of choice, of whether people would confront justice or keep hiding behind hollow rules. Truth doesn't need a mic to be heard. It only takes one person to rise and say, no, not today. I won't be silent anymore. Robert Klein emerged from behind the counter like his feet were chained to the floor. His face flushed, chin trembling, arms stiff at his sides like a statue misplaced in the middle of real-life theater. Lisa wasn't done. Her voice kept rising, each word carving deeper into the last shreds of dignity left in the room. She's a fraud, pretending to be the owner when she's clearly a fake. Vanessa turned her head toward Lisa, the movement slow and deliberate, a silent warning. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just looked. The marble floor beneath them shone like a mirror. The frosted glass meant to offer privacy now veiled the truth. The recessed lighting couldn't soften the atmosphere that had thickened into a fog of tension. The luxury lounge now looked more like a courtroom, missing only the judge's bench, and maybe it was right beneath her. Edward, still leaned on the column, gave a crooked smile. He added fuel to the rising blaze with a voice soaked in contempt. She stole the money, and now she's wasting all our time. Why hasn't someone called the cops? By the coffee counter, 2 customers turned. One half lifted their phone, then froze. Too afraid to record. Natalie, arms still crossed like she was the one being wronged, narrowed her eyes and pressed each word with venom. It's stolen money. No real client walks in dressed like that to withdraw $500,000. Vanessa didn't move, not a flicker of defense. But inside, she was burning. The outfit she chose that morning. Worn jeans, plain black shoes, and a soft sweater. Wasn't careless. It was a statement. It was armor, not shiny but strong enough to withstand the cold stares of those who believed wealth always had to sparkle. And the irony? That simplicity was exactly what made them lose control. Maya stood up. She trembled slightly, but her voice rang out clear, like a church bell in an abandoned town. That's enough. You've crossed the line. You don't even know who she is. Edward burst out laughing. Oh, we know her type. Logged into the wrong account and thinks she can pull $500,000 like it's a birthday surprise. Robert shifted his feet. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, but silence won. Keith still held his phone, hands shaking slightly, eyes fixed on Vanessa. I should be recording this. Vanessa shook her head, voice low but firm. No. Use your voice, not your camera. Calvin stepped forward. His voice was deep, like a cello hitting the final note of a requiem. If we want to change the air in this room, we have to speak the truth, not wait for a clip to trend. Keith sighed, still unable to believe what he was seeing. This doesn't even feel real. Maya turned to him, lips pressed tight. It's real. This is how they treat us. Natalie hissed, you people are being dramatic. And then Vanessa, still as solid as stone, in the eye of the storm, spoke. You called security because I exist. That's the real spectacle. Her words sliced clean through the smug skin of the people around her. Finally, Robert spoke. His voice was small, tired, like it had been dragged through a decade of guilt. Do you have account verification documents? And the question wasn't about procedure. It was soaked in shame. Vanessa didn't look at him. She dialed. Carla, they've escalated. Initiate phase 2. Carla's voice came through instantly, crisp and commanding like an order from a control tower. Call in language logged. Lisa has been time-stamped for initiating a security call. Vanessa replied, her voice soft but dropping like iron onto marble. They'll hear it. Every word. Robert straightened slightly, his face twisted, torn between two worlds, loyalty to the lie or facing the truth that was crumbling like old plaster on a rotted wall. By now, the room wasn't a customer lounge. It had become a silent courtroom. Justice without a gavel, only the eyes that see. Vanessa didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. With nothing but calm and the quiet authority of her lived history, she was peeling back the curtain around the hollow performance of this system. The room had passed the chaos of noise. Now it was quiet, so quiet you could hear a repressed sigh. Robert Kleene, the assistant branch manager, stood like a man staring at the collapse of everything he once believed. He no longer looked at Lisa with the same obedience. Her nod, "Don't worry about this," suddenly looked cheap, pitiful. Edward opened his mouth again, his voice like metal scraping against stone. She was pulling a stunt, playing the victim for clicks. But Keith stepped forward, cutting him off, not with the voice of an onlooker anymore, but someone who had chosen a side. "Oh, she's not recording anything." "I was, but I stopped because she doesn't need video. She needs us to speak." The room flinched, like it had just realized someone had truly been listening. And that, always, is how change begins. Natalie muttered, her voice no longer certain. "Security's on the way. They'll take care of it." Maya still stood, unmoving. She asked, angry and rational all at once, "Take care of what? That she wants to withdraw her own money?" Lisa's voice rose, as if volume could patch the cracks forming in her logic. "You're being manipulated. Wake up. Someone like her with $500,000? Vanessa turned now, fully facing her, her eyes no longer just reflected, they illuminated. "And scared, Lisa? I can hear it in your voice. That's the sound of someone watching their job slip away." Lisa narrowed her eyes and gave a bitter laugh. "Now you're threatening me?" Vanessa shook her head gently, her voice cold as a winter breath. "Oh, just a mirror." And then, as if on cue, Carla's voice returned through the phone. Clear, decisive, unwavering. "I've escalated the incident to the Corporate Ethics Board. They are now monitoring the situation live. All discriminatory language from the past 3 minutes has been logged. Ownership documentation for the bank has been linked for real-time verification." Vanessa gave a single nod. "Keep the line open," Lisa scoffed. "You think some techie buzzwords and a fake call are going to save your little act?" But it wasn't Lisa who shattered the wall of denial, it was Robert. He turned, his voice hoarse like someone had squeezed his throat but still forced him to speak. What if she's telling the truth?" Lisa whipped around, her glare cutting straight through Robert's chest. "You're naive." But no one was listening to Lisa anymore. Cracks had formed, and soon the entire crumbling framework of old assumptions would collapse. Vanessa stood. Her shoes made no sound on the marble, but her voice rang out like a bronze bell. "You asked for financial proof. You accused me of fraud. You called security. You mocked the way I dress, and you humiliated me in a room full of people." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an indictment. "And yet I'm still here. Not crying. Not leaving. Do you know why?" The room was silent. Even Edward, the loudest of them all, could only stand with arms crossed, lips pressed shut. Maya stepped forward and stood beside Vanessa, like a quiet declaration that she was no longer alone. "What now?" she asked. Vanessa looked straight ahead. "We wait. Because the truth is coming, whether they want it or not." Lisa crossed her arms, lips tight like she was swallowing rage. "You're bluffing. You've got nothing," Edward shouted. "If she had money, she'd have shown us already. You people always act like victims until someone asks for a real number." From across the room, Calvin turned back. His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold, like forged steel. "You people," the words landed like a slap, silencing every excuse in the air. Robert sank into his seat, eyes blank. "We shouldn't treat people like this." Natalie rolled her eyes, speaking like a machine. "It's just policy." Vanessa spoke again to Carla. "Are we in phase 3 yet?" Carla responded swiftly, "Yes. I'm reviewing Lisa's incident history. 8 complaints filed by women of color, all marked unverified by her and never submitted. Not a good look." Vanessa closed her eyes gently. She had suspected it, but hearing it, with proof, was another cut altogether. "Thank you, Carla. Keep going." Maya clenched her fists, her voice catching in her throat. "They're erasing us with policies, with tone, with fake concerns about security." Vanessa placed a hand gently on Maya's shoulder. "Not today." Lisa laughed, but it sounded fractured, brittle. "You think a phone call and some software are enough?" Vanessa locked eyes with her. There was no anger in her gaze, only the judgment of someone who had been wounded and learned to survive. Not words, evidence, and the end. Vanessa Clark hadn't come to save the system. She came to end a toxic habit, silence. The years she'd climbed each rung of the corporate ladder weren't just built on brilliance, but on speaking the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. "No, I didn't come here to change everything," she said, her voice still soft as mist, but sharper than steel. "I came to end the silence that's rotted in this branch for far too long." Keith exhaled, not with doubt, but awe. "Damned." Calvin nodded slowly, his gaze deep, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "And that's why we don't need the video. When truth is spoken right, it doesn't need a filter." But just as the room began to stir with the light of realization, Natalie, who'd been suspiciously quiet, stepped forward. In her hand was the tablet Vanessa had dropped earlier. She looked down at the screen, said nothing. Then, without a word, she flung it aside. It skidded across the marble and slammed into the leg of a leather chair. "Stolen garbage," she muttered, like she thought contempt might be enough to mask the fear rising inside her. Vanessa looked at her, eyes narrowed, voice low and sharp. "Is that yours to destroy, or is control just your reflex when you don't understand something?" Natalie turned away without a word. But that silence was the clearest answer of all. Robert watched her go, shaking his head. His voice cracked as if it had been trapped behind his ribs. "She's gone too far." And right then Vanessa spoke again. Not like a verdict, but like a warning from a judge who didn't need a gavel. "Every second you spend speaking instead of thinking is another second closer to losing your job." Lisa curled her lip, clinging to the last thread of control. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Vanessa turned, meeting her gaze head-on. "No, I'm your reckoning." That calmness sent a chill through the room. Lisa didn't hesitate. "Call the cops. She's a financial threat." Natalie grabbed the landline without a pause, dialing like she'd done it 100 times. "We have a woman attempting an illegal withdrawal. Large amount, possibly stolen." No stammer, no hesitation. She'd done this before. Vanessa remained seated, hands placed neatly on her knees, eyes steady. Her voice was quiet, but it burned like a line drawn in fire. "You just filed a knowingly false federal report. I hope you're ready to explain that in court." Lisa laughed again, but this time it didn't sound easy. She leaned back against the espresso machine like it was the only thing holding her up. "Sweetheart, things don't work the way you think. We protect the institution, not imposters." She turned to Robert and barked the order like Vanessa was a piece of furniture that needed to be removed. "Get her out. Now." Robert didn't move. His eyes moved from Vanessa to Natalie, then to Lisa. "She hasn't even raised her voice," he murmured. "And that's what scares you." Edward charged forward, trying to reclaim the spotlight, waving his business card like it was a badge of nobility. "She's laundering money, it's obvious. I've got a meeting with Treasury in 5 minutes. I'm VIP, and her? She's a scam. This whole thing is a stunt." Lisa wasn't waiting anymore. She marched behind Vanessa's chair, bent down and growled, "Show me your account history. If you're real, pull it up right now for everyone to see." But her tone wasn't procedural. It was a dare, a shove, trying to force someone over the edge. Vanessa didn't move. Not a single inch, because some battles aren't won by shouting. They're won by enduring. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in like the knock of old power trying to force its way back in. Tyler Moss, the branch's head of security, stepped in, uniform crisp, Summit Wealth badge gleaming on his chest, boots hitting the floor like the start of a drill. "What's going on here?" he demanded, not waiting for an answer. Natalie didn't blink. She pointed at Vanessa like she was calling out a student who didn't belong in the gifted class. "She's under suspicion of fraud. We asked for verification. She refused. Now she's filming and threatening." Tyler nodded, walked straight up to Vanessa, his voice not asking but commanding, "I need your bag and your tablet." Vanessa didn't move, just silence. But to Tyler, that silence felt like defiance. Without another word, he slapped the bag to the floor. It fell with a soft thud, like a silent accusation. "You're being detained for failure to cooperate," he declared. From the middle of the room, Calvin stepped forward, tall and unshaken. His voice rang with steel. "You don't have the authority. She hasn't broken a single law." Nearby, Maya clutched her phone. Not to film, just to hold something solid. Her eyes shimmered. "Even when we're quiet, it's still not enough," she whispered. Vanessa lifted her head, her eyes meeting Tyler's. No fear, just decades of anger, packed down and pressed behind the eyes of a woman who had been misjudged for too long. "Touch me again, and Summit Wealth will pay for it." Tyler sneered. "Is that a threat? You don't belong here." Those 5 words, "You don't belong here," dropped like an anvil, crushing the last thin mask of civility. The air cracked open, because in those 5 words were centuries of exclusion, and the weight of 1,000 stares that had always seen her as an outsider. Calvin stepped in, chest to chest with Tyler. "Step back, man. Don't take this further." Tyler tensed. "You're interfering now?" Calvin didn't flinch. "I'm protecting a client." Across the room, Keith shot to his feet, holding his phone high. "This needs to be documented." Vanessa turned to him. Her voice broke, not from fear, but from fury that had reached its final edge. "No, Keith. They don't need to see, they need to hear." Keith lowered his phone. "Then say it loud." Vanessa turned to Lisa. She didn't raise her voice, but every word landed like a hammer, smashing the fake marble this entire room had been built on. "You demand my background like I owe you my identity. But I don't owe this place anything. I've achieved more than anyone here, including you. Instead of asking where my money came from, maybe ask yourselves why you think you have the right to question me." Right then, Carla's voice returned through the phone, this time clear and final, like a last alarm bell. "To Vanessa, Protocol 6 is now fully activated. The Compliance Board has flagged Lisa's employee file. 2023 audit logs are being retrieved, and Edward has received a formal warning for previous misconduct. One more incident and his client privileges will be suspended." Vanessa didn't smile, she simply nodded. "Let it proceed." And in that moment every mask dropped. No shouting, no rage, just quiet resolve. And a system for the first time being forced to look at itself. Lisa Newman leaned forward, voice tight, like she was clinging to the last shreds of control, slipping through her fingers. "You're not getting away with this." Vanessa locked eyes with her, voice sharp as a blade, peeling away every illusion. "What are you talking about? That I'm a wealthy black woman with enough composure not to flip the chair you're sitting in? I've lived like that for 20 years. Robert, overwhelmed as the rising tide swept away everything false around him, took a step back, muttering like a man confessing something buried. "I didn't sign up for this part of the game." Natalie, still clutching the landline like it was her last lifeline, continued speaking into it, calmly, flatly, like she was reading a recipe. "My name is Natalie Wells. There may be financial fraud in progress." Around them, the once silent customers were no longer quiet. An older man near the window shook his head. "Nonsense. A young couple, Black husband, white wife, clasped hands tightly, eyes fixed on the center of the room. And then, it wasn't shouting or slamming that changed the air. It was the voice of someone who could no longer carry silence. Robert took a deep breath and spoke, each word slicing through the tension like a blade. My need to say something. All eyes turned to him. Lisa, Natalie, what we're doing here is wrong. Lisa froze. You wouldn't dare. But Robert looked down, not to avoid, but to bow to truth. Natalie wanted to call the police from the start. She refused to verify the account, refused to check the system. She said, just get them here, and Vanessa would be dealt with fast. Natalie's mouth dropped open. You're lying. Robert didn't flinch. He nodded once. I was there when you said it, and you said it knowing who she might be? Edward exploded, shouting like a child whose toy had just been taken. You're turning on your own people for her. She's fooling all of you. But Vanessa didn't need protection anymore. She rose, each movement a declaration. Let's find out if I'm fooling anyone. Her voice rose, not with calm anymore, but with authority. I'm Vanessa Clark, CEO of Summit Enterprises, and I own this bank. The room froze. Every second you spent insulting me, every accusation, every contemptuous glance has been recorded, archived, and now witnessed. No one said a word. The crowded room felt like it had been flash frozen. Lisa's color drained from her face. Natalie inched back toward the wall. Tyler, the security chief, looked like he'd seen a ghost. But what truly shifted the room wasn't the revelation. It was the reaction. A single clap, then another. Then a wave of applause rolled through the room like a tide. Calvin stepped forward. I knew I'd seen her before. Forbes, 2 years ago. She's the one who saved this bank. Maya stood beside her, eyes brimming with tears. That's our CEO? Keith whispered, almost with regret. Should have filmed that part. Vanessa looked around. Her voice was no longer a statement. It was a conclusion. The issue isn't that you didn't know who I am. It's how you treated someone you assumed had no worth. Lisa stammered, voice shaking. You planned all of this? Vanessa replied, calm as stone. No, I tested you, and you failed. In that very moment, a distant siren howled outside. The police were coming. But justice, real justice, had arrived long ago. Lisa screamed. No longer a manager, just someone grasping at the last shards of denial. Stop her before she escapes? Tyler, snapped awake by the command, lunged, reaching for Vanessa's arm. But she didn't move, didn't resist. She stood still as if the floor itself held her in place with the weight of history. Touch me, she said, voice low but unshakable, and you'll lose more than your job. Just as Tyler's hand reached out, Maya stepped between them. Back off, shouted, no hesitation, no fear for the first time. You heard her. She owns this place. Tyler froze. He looked from Vanessa to Lisa. Beneath the neat press of his uniform, his stance began to crack. Just a flicker of hesitation, a small fracture. But in this room, it thundered. Then the double doors burst open. 2 police officers stepped in, their boots tapping against the marble like the heartbeat of a room awaiting final judgment. One of them, a weary-looking white man whose face bore the years, lifted his gaze as it met Vanessa's. His brow furrowed. We received a report of fraud. Can someone explain? Natalie stepped forward like she was accepting an award. She's impersonating a high-level client, tried to withdraw $500,000 with no verification. This could be federal theft. Her voice was sharp as a razor. But sometimes razors cut the hand that holds them. Vanessa didn't blink. She turned to the officers and said, I'll explain. But not yet. The room went still. Then, from a shadowed corner near the frosted glass, a woman's voice rose. Soft, shaky, but sharp enough to tear the suffocating air. They're lying. All eyes turned. Zara Brooks, the young woman in a worn denim jacket, quiet since the beginning, small, almost invisible. She stood, hands trembling slightly, but her eyes burned like fire. 2 weeks ago, they did the same to me. I came to open an account for my photo studio. Natalie refused to process my business ID. She said we don't open accounts for freelancers with unstable financial histories. Natalie whipped around, voice desperate. That's not true. You're lying. Zara raised her phone. No video needed. I recorded it, never posted it, but maybe now's the time. The room broke into murmurs, like a storm had finally been named. Tyler took a step back. The officer frowned and turned to Natalie. Ma'am, did you file this report knowing she owns this bank? Natalie turned pale, like someone waking up from a dream. At the time, she didn't own it. Vanessa turned, her gaze the kind that ends arguments before they start. I've owned this bank for nearly 2 years, so that statement is either a lie or a confession. Keith, still holding his phone but no longer recording, whispered, She doesn't need a camera, she is the camera. Calvin stepped forward, eyes on the 2 officers. You just witnessed the end of a system, one where people like Natalie, Lisa, and Edward were protected. And I believe you know that now. The older officer nodded, slow but deliberate. There will be no arrest today, but we will file a report, a full one. At that moment, Carla's voice came through Vanessa's phone, like a clock striking the final hour. Vanessa, headquarters received Zara Brooks' complaint. It had been buried. Natalie marked it ineligible for review. Vanessa closed her eyes for a beat. Not in shock, but because some truths still hurt even when expected. Zara hadn't sat down before Carla continued, voice calm but powerful like the last word before judgment. Natalie's action violates Compliance Clause 4.3. Vanessa nodded. And Lisa? She personally signed off on the rejection. Vanessa turned to Lisa. Once a stone statue in the boardroom, now shaking. You told me to leave. You denied my documents, called me a fraud. And now you're hiding behind Natalie's paperwork? Lisa stammered, voice stripped of command. You dressed like you didn't belong. I just made a judgment. Vanessa took a step closer, her gaze peeling away every layer of pretense. That wasn't judgment, that was bias. Edward, still lurking behind the crowd, sneered. All right, that's enough of this theater. I'm leaving. I've got real business. But Maya shouted, No, you're not going anywhere. You're part of this. Edward curled his lip, spitting venom. You people are always so loud. That sentence detonated the room. Keith stepped forward, voice cold as ice. You people? You mean the woman who owns this bank? Calvin didn't wait. He stepped between Edward and the rest of the room. Get out. That VIP card won't protect you from the truth we all just saw. Edward turned, furious, but before he could leave, one of the officers said, Sir, we'll need a statement before you go. Edward stopped, then quietly sat down, for the first time, with nothing left to lean on. Vanessa turned to the officers. I want to handle this internally. No one gets arrested. Not yet. I want everyone here to hear this, understand it, and remember what just happened. One of the officers nodded. You sure? Vanessa offered a faint smile. I'm sure. She turned to Zara. Your brain. Zara lowered her head. I just wanted to open an account. Vanessa placed a hand over her heart, her voice warm, like a promise between those who've been cast aside. Starting today, you'll never be treated that way again. You'll get your account personally processed by the executive board. No fees, no judgment. You deserve that. Calvin stepped in beside her, voice full of respect. You didn't just stop a system, you exposed it. Vanessa nodded, quiet but resolute. And now, I'm going to tear it down, brick by brick. Lisa mumbled, almost to herself. This was never supposed to happen. Robert stood beside her. He didn't make excuses, only offered the truth. This was always going to happen. We just didn't think we'd get caught. Tyler, still standing silently by the door, started to turn, but Vanessa raised a hand. Stay. Your name's already in the file. Maya whispered to Keith. She's not just firing people, she's rewriting the entire rule book. Carla's voice rang out again, like the final bell of a long overdue reckoning. Summit's compliance officers will arrive in 10 minutes. They've requested that Vanessa personally oversee the internal review. Full authority has been granted. Vanessa gave a slight smile. Good. I've been preparing for this day longer than they ever imagined. Then she turned to face the entire room. clients, staff, officers, and a young woman named Zara. No longer a CEO, no longer a woman under suspicion, now simply the owner of this room. Enough. 3 words. Soft, unraised. And the entire room went silent. What had moments ago been a pressure cooker of tension was now completely still. Vanessa stepped forward. No name badge, no uniform, but she carried herself like a verdict, a final chapter. For the past 10 minutes, I've been insulted, doubted, and disrespected. Right the middle of the building that bears the name of the company I built. She opened a slim leather bag and pulled out a black folder embossed in gold with the Summit Wealth Bank logo. Slowly, she opened it, then turned it toward the nearest officer, and then to the rest of the room. Inside were an executive authority ID card, a notarized ownership certificate, and a board-signed letter of delegation. My name is Vanessa Clark, founder and CEO of Summit Enterprises. I own 81% of this bank, and starting today I will no longer tolerate misconduct under this roof. No one moved. No one stood tall. Lisa looked like she'd turned to stone. Robert stepped back, face pale. Natalie slumped into a chair like her legs had given out. Tyler dropped his hands from his belt. Edward, though seated, leaned forward for the first time, with nothing to say. Then, through the phone, still on speaker, Carla confirmed, Vanessa holds full termination authority under Summit's Compliance Protocol 4B. This meeting is being recorded for HR verification. You may proceed. Vanessa didn't smile. She simply turned, facing the row of employees who once looked down on her, now bowed by truth. Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang like a bell through a cathedral. Lisa Newman, you're terminated, effective immediately, for racial discrimination, abuse of authority, and obstructing client service. Lisa's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Less than half an hour ago, she was queen of this room. Now her voice had disappeared. Robert Klein, Vanessa continued, eyes never leaving the front row. You're also terminated, not just for complicity, but for remaining silent while a customer was humiliated, suspected, and degraded. Robert didn't argue. He only bowed his head, accepting a sentence that needed no defense. Natalie Wells, your contract is terminated for fabricating risk reports, filing a false police report, and suppressing a racial discrimination complaint. Natalie exhaled sharply, her cold composure gone. She trembled. I didn't know it was you. Vanessa didn't blink. And if it wasn't me, would someone else not deserve respect? Natalie's lips parted, but no excuse formed. The words died before they could take shape. Tyler Moss, Vanessa said, turning to the uniformed guard. You are immediately suspended for use of excessive force, attempted unlawful detainment, and failure to follow de-escalation protocol. Tyler stayed upright, but he didn't respond. He simply stepped into the far corner of the lounge, like waiting for the last bus out of his own reflection. Edward Pierce, Vanessa said, her voice turning cold as forged steel. You are banned from all Summit branches and affiliates, effective immediately, for harassment, racial slurs, and documented policy violation. Edward jumped to his feet, his face flushing red. You can't do this, Edward shouted. I'm a high-value client at this bank. From the right side, Maya fired back. Not today, you're not. Vanessa raised her hand, calm but resolute. We don't build institutions to serve the loudest egos. We build them to protect the dignity of those who walk through these doors, believing they'll be treated fairly. The room erupted, but this time in applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind. It was the sound of years of silence breaking. A raw, honest roar that needed no permission. Calvin Holt nodded slowly. That's justice, right here, right now. Zara Brooks still stood in the corner, her eyes brimming with tears. I never thought I'd get to see this, never. Vanessa walked over to the young woman, placing a hand on her shoulder like passing on a flame. You shouldn't have to fight to be recognized, but because you did, not just for yourself, but for those who never dared to speak, you will not be forgotten. Beneath a marble glass tower, inside a gun shop that thought it owned all the rules, one woman sat still, until every lie had now left to hide. No shouting, no force, no viral footage, just the right words, spoken at the right time, by a heart that would not yield. Vanessa Clark, who didn't just own the bank, she rewrote the definition of justice with nothing but her voice. Vanessa turned to Natalie, now more shadow than person. Her gaze wasn't cold anymore. It carried a painful truth. "You didn't just witness this day," Vanessa said quietly. "You were believed." As the officers prepared to leave, a hoarse voice suddenly broke the silence, like wind blowing through a scorched forest. "Wait." Everyone froze. All eyes turned to Natalie Wells, the woman who once seemed untouchable, now standing still in the center of her undoing. She spoke, each word falling like the confession of a soul finally unburdening itself. "I suppressed 8 complaints this year, all from women of color. I marked them as duplicates, unverifiable, or outside the processing window. I did it to keep our numbers clean. Robert knew," I told him. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Vanessa turned to Carla. "Can that be verified?" Carla responded as though she'd been waiting for the question. "Confirmed. We've recovered both audio and written records. Natalie's voice is present in 2 recordings. Robert's signature appears on 4. Natalie collapsed into her chair. Tears slipped through her fingers as she covered her face. Vanessa didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She stepped forward, her voice soft and steady, like rain at midnight. "You're not the victim. You held the torch that lit the system on fire, while others were burned alive under its flame." Then she turned back to the room. "One final time. Ownership isn't a paper or a chair, it's responsibility. And mine is to make sure this never happens again. Not here, not as long as I stand in this system." Carla's voice echoed through the phone. "The board has authorized a full audit and assigned Vanessa as lead for branch reform." "Vanessa, the floor's yours." Vanessa looked around at Calvin, Maya, Zara, Keith, the ones who had spoken, who had stood, and even at those who had stayed silent, whose eyes now saw differently. "Then let's begin, not with a speech, but with action. This branch," Vanessa declared, "no longer belongs to people like Lisa. It belongs to the ones this bank was built to serve." The sentence cut like a final blade, slicing the tether between past and future. The door to reform wasn't just open, it was wide enough for hope to walk through, head held high. Vanessa didn't wait for applause. She stepped into the center of the room, next to the leather chair that once symbolized privilege. Now, just an empty seat. Effective immediately. All operations at this branch are suspended. No new transactions, no consultations, no client meetings, until we redefine what this bank stands for. No one protested. No one complained. Some nodded. Others clapped, but no one turned away. "We are officially launching the Summit Equity Initiative. Right here. Not next quarter. Right here in this room." Vanessa turned slowly, her gaze stern yet compassionate. "Every employee who wants to remain will undergo communication screening, public accountability for diversity conduct, and must sign a cultural confrontation pledge. There will be no more forgiveness for discrimination disguised as procedure. No one questioned who Vanessa was anymore. No one dared pretend they hadn't seen the truth. They had seen it, and there was no unseeing it. One woman, without raising her voice, had made an entire institution stop and listen. One woman, without banners or slogans, had rewritten the rules, with courage and a heart that refused to compromise. The silence in the room had reached its final form. No longer tense like a drawn wire, it was the hush before a storm. And then, from Vanessa's tablet, a voice rang out, low, clear, and as steady as justice striking the hour. "All files have been prepared. Internal ethics will arrive within the hour. The executive board has approved." The room seemed to hold its breath. A wave of change was rising. Maya, who had stayed quiet for most of it, raised her hand, trembling slightly. Her voice cracked but carried hope. What's a speech audit? Vanessa turned to her, smiling gently, though her eyes were sharp as a drawn blade. It means from now on, we don't just review numbers. We listen to words. Who said what? Who stayed silent, and who was treated like a burden just for walking through the door? Calvin nodded, like he'd just heard a truth he never knew he needed. Keith whispered, "That's what makes it human." Vanessa gave a soft nod. "Exactly." And then a sound no one expected rose from the back of the room. It was Tyler Moss, the former head of security, a man who once held order with silence, now becoming the one to break it. He stepped forward, no longer angry, only tired. The kind of weariness that no badge or uniform can mask. "I need to say this," he said. "I didn't just fail to stop what happened. I was part of it." Though the room was full, the air turned cold, like it was just one man standing in front of his own verdict. 2 months ago, Natalie came to me. She said upper management was cracking down, and Lisa had a plan to clean up the red flags. My job was to make sure anyone who pushed back was handled before it could go on the record. Maya stood, frozen. "You mean they flagged customers based on how they looked, how they spoke, the questions they asked, how they reacted to unfair fees?" Tyler replied, eyes locked forward. "I knew it was wrong. I still did it." He looked at Vanessa. "You gave me this job, and I used it as a shield for the wrong people." Vanessa stepped forward, slowly, not with rage, but with eyes sharp enough to shatter the glass around them. "Did Robert know?" "Knew enough to never ask more. Knew who to avoid," Tyler said, lowering his head. From the tablet, Carla's voice returned, like the system itself speaking its verdict. "Vanessa, we've identified 3 altered compliance reports following client complaints. Tyler's name appears on all 3. Tyler didn't argue. He didn't beg. "I'm not saying this to be forgiven. I'm saying it because, for the first time, I heard a leader I actually respect." Vanessa didn't soften. "You nearly had me arrested. You intimidated innocent people. And now you ask for mercy?" Tyler shook his head. "No, I am asking for justice. I want consequences. But I also want you to know there's more. Natalie wasn't alone. There's a list, an internal CRM tag for problem clients. That list is longer than you think. By retrieving the list now, all access has been frozen." Vanessa turned again, surveying a room now too small to contain the magnitude of what was happening. "This is why reform can't wait. Not tomorrow, not after a seminar. Right here, in this room, where silence once made prejudice feel like policy." She paused, just long enough to let the air clear, then continued. "And today, we pull it up from the root." Applause rang out. Not in relief, in readiness. Maya stepped forward, standing beside Vanessa. "We want to help." Vanessa nodded. "No words needed. We'll do it together, starting with truth." And the room, once suffocating with doubt and fear, now filled with voices no longer shaking, confessions no longer made to escape punishment, but to begin healing. A culture built on silence and exclusion had cracked, just enough for light to begin seeping in. As the last round of applause faded into the air, Vanessa Clark stood upright, not as someone who'd won, but as someone who had fulfilled something sacred. She didn't look to the past. She didn't bask in praise. She looked around the room. Once just a VIP lounge, now the front line of an inner revolution. The employees who had violated policy were moved to a separate waiting room, but the clients stayed, not out of curiosity, but out of solidarity. Faces once distant now leaned closer, united by something no bank had ever traded in: the truth. A compliance officer approached and handed Vanessa a short file. "These are the provisional actions approved by the board." She scanned it quickly and nodded. "We begin here." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like it was etched in brick. Irreversible. Effected immediately, Summit Wealth will implement speech audits across all high-value client branches. No more hiding behind silence. Every word must stand in the light. Miami will be the pilot location. From the tablet, Carla's voice followed. An official echo marking the dawn of a new era. Edward Pierce's account has been terminated. His investment firm is under investigation for covert discriminatory practices. Vanessa glanced at the empty chair where Edward once sat, barking orders like the bank belonged to him. He had influence, she said, but no character. Maya stepped forward, her eyes no longer afraid, but full of hope. So what now? What happens tomorrow? Vanessa turned to the young woman, her smile gentle, her gaze unwavering. We build something that doesn't just react to injustice, but prevents it from ever taking root. That's the legacy I want to leave. Keith spoke up, his voice still catching. You didn't just fire a group of people, you exposed an entire ideology. Vanessa nodded, weary but undeterred, and we'll keep pulling it apart until there's no shadow left to hide in. As she turned toward the internal audit team, a raspy voice cut through from the back of the room. "One more thing." The entire room turned. A tall, lean older man in a crisp gray suit stepped forward slowly, a premium client badge pinned to his lapel. "My name is Richard Langford," he said, his voice unsteady but clear. "I oversaw training for this region a decade ago. I trained Lisa, Robert, and even Natalie when she was just starting out." He swallowed hard, his eyes moist, not with emotion, but with shame. "I've never said this out loud. We didn't teach them to discriminate by race or class with words. But we taught them how to screen for quality clients, suitable ones, the right fit. And in that system, people like you were always excluded from the start." Silence fell again, this time not of fear, but of reckoning. "I watched everything today with shame, and I want to be counted among the guilty, at the root. I helped build the bias. Now, I want to help tear it down." Vanessa stepped closer to him. Her eyes held no judgment, only the quiet weight of listening to a long overdue confession. "Rain down?" she asked, her voice soft as mist. Richard's voice cracked. "Because watching you dismantle this entire system with nothing but your voice, I realized I had one too, and I never dared to use it." Vanessa didn't respond with words, but in her eyes were 2 decades of endurance, 1 day of justice, and a future where no one would have to prove their worth simply for being different. And so, in a room once filled with suspicion and silence, a new generation was born, not through slogans, but through action, not from the heights of prestige, but from the depths of shared humanity. This wasn't the end. It was the first moment where history began to be rewritten by the very people once erased from its pages. Vanessa stood quietly for a few seconds. Then she turned to the man who had just laid bare his truth. Her eyes weren't cold nor forgiving, just honest. "If you had a voice you never used, then now is the time. Use it in the right place, at the right time." Tyler nodded and stepped toward the internal audit team, ready to give a full statement and join the Reform Training Initiative. A small beginning, but heavy with the weight of redemption. Across the room, Carla's voice rang out again from Vanessa's tablet, clear and calm, like a verdict. "Vanessa, I've completed the review of the customer flag list that Tyler mentioned. Of the 17 marked as security risks, not a single one has a criminal record. 15 are people of color or of Latin descent." Vanessa exhaled deeply. She closed her eyes, letting that final wave pass through her like the last surge of a storm. "So it's official. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a culture that's been rotting from within." Maya gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't need to say much. But then she whispered, "You didn't just fight it, you ripped it wide open in broad daylight." Zara, the young woman who just wanted to open a small business account, was still standing there, clutching her phone like it held hope itself. Her voice trembled slightly, but shone with belief. "I came here to start a business, but you gave me a future." Vanessa turned to her, smiling gently. You'll still start your business. But this time it'll be with a bank that truly sees you. She looked around once more, at the walls that once held bias like bricks, and the faces now awakened. And then she spoke, not to any one person, but to all of them, to the entire room, to the invisible world beyond these walls, where no camera was rolling, but human hearts were still listening. Let today be the last time silence wins over truth. Let this moment ring as a wake-up call that justice doesn't come from hashtags. It comes from who we choose to be when no one is filming. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to slam a table. I simply stood still and spoke clearly. If I could do that here, then you, wherever you are, you can too. She turned and walked toward the internal office, where real reform was waiting to begin. Carla's final words echoed like the period ending a broken chapter of the past. Summit wealth will never be the same again. And that was exactly what needed to happen. The door closed softly behind them, but the message, the lesson, and the legacy remained. Within a room once full of prejudice, now a place where justice had finally been named. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or denied, let this story remind you, your voice matters. And justice, like every rightful beginning, always starts with the truth.